I just got done. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the final session of the 2020 Sanibel Island Writers Conference, or the Sanibel Online Writers Conference. I am thrilled that our final session is with two of our very favorite presenters and authors, our good friends Julianna Baggott and Nick Flynn. Hi, guys.
Hey.
Welcome back to the Sanibel Conference.
So good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's beautiful here. It's beautiful.
Isn't it gorgeous?
The ocean, the trees.
I hope you're wearing your sunblock.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And your bug spray.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, you guys are only going to have 45 minutes, so I'm going to read your bios very quickly for the few people who might not be familiar with your work and introduce you, and then I'm going to get out of the way. And I just want to say thanks again for participating. To everybody out there who's viewing, thank you for tuning in. I think we had a great time this year, and I'll see you at the end of the session with Julianna and Nick to say a final goodbye.
Thanks, Tom, for doing this. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you. So, Julianna Baggott, I don't have time. I would take up the whole session to read all the books that both of these guys have written, you know, to maybe just the titles. But I will say that Julianna Baggott, she's my age. She's actually a few months younger than me, and yet she's written over 20 books. And, you know, and they've all sold very well and done, you know, been critically acclaimed. And her children's series, The Antibodies, is currently in development at Disney+. She has written under her own name and many pen names. Her novels Pure and Harriet Wolf's Seventh Book of Wonders were New York Times Notable Books of the Year. Her essays and poems have appeared everywhere that is in print. And there are over 100 foreign editions of her books out there. She also teaches screenwriting at Florida State University's College of Motion Picture Arts. And we're just thrilled that she's back here with us at the Sanibel Conference. She was at our first conference in 2006 and has come back many times since. And Nick Flynn has worked as a ship's captain, an electrician, and a caseworker with homeless adults. He is the author of 12 books, including the New York Times best-selling memoir, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, which was made into a film that you all might have seen called Being Flynn. His most recent books are I Will Destroy You, a collection of poems, and This Is the Night Our House Will Catch Fire, a memoir. Nick and Julianna, welcome. Everybody, enjoy what they have to say. Take care.
Thanks, Tom.
I think we were supposed to decide like who was going to talk first.
Yeah, I think you are. I have a feeling that you should talk first. I want to hear what you have to say. I'm really thrilled to be here with you. And yeah, to hear you. I'm really glad that they put us together. And to talk about different genres about, you know, because, you know, one thing you have, you know, we talked briefly before this, and you have written in many genres, and I've written in some, not as many as you, I don't think.
Well, maybe I can lure you into them.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the idea of genre too, and I'd like to talk about just even what genres are, and like because I sort of broke down my last book, and I think I found like 10 different genres within the last book. So, but I might be getting the idea of genre wrong. So, why don't you start?
Well, I like that idea because I like the you know, if we're going to talk about boundaries, we should probably talk about crossing them. You know what I mean? And also that the best food is always found when two or more cultures and boundaries kind of, you know.
Fusion.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm very curious to hear about that book, and because I tend to wall them off a good bit when I'm in them, but you could be reading a novel of mine and not know that you're also reading a poem that I kind of took and maybe altered to make more casual sounding or more, you know, less heightened, but it's exactly the poem kind of shoved into a novel.
Does it exist in both places? Does it exist in the poem book if you've written a poem book about it, and it exists in the novel? Yeah. Has anyone ever called you? Has anyone ever called you on it?
Yeah, just one person, and I was so excited because I read the book of poems. That's the other thing is that when you're in multi-genres, I don't know if you felt this way, that like one will get jealous of the others. Have your like because your memoirs have, you know, sold more than I'm assuming, you know, have had more readership. Does your poet ever kind of pissy about it? Like, wait a minute, why am I not getting as many readers?
Not always, actually. There have been books of poetry that have sold more than some of my memoirs I've written. So, and I'm not sure what that says. Once I did a reading at a place, for poetry reading at a place, and a woman came up to me afterwards after I read to them, and she came up and to have me sign a book or to buy a book to sign. And then when she looked at me, she goes, "Wait, you're not Vince Flynn." And she'd gone through the entire poetry reading, assuming I was Vince Flynn, and was very impressed by the. And then she just turned and walked away. She thought I had tricked her or something.
Yeah, I got mistaken for Haven Kimmel once in a bookstore. And I was like, "Oh, thank you so much." Yeah, but then I had to tell them the truth that I am not a girl called Zippy. Although weirdly, one of my nicknames in high school was Zippy, because I last Baggott and I was fast runner, so Ziploc bags. It happened. That happened. But I mean, I think that for me, I really like writing across genres because it takes me out of authority. You know what I mean? And I really only kind of think of myself as a fiction writer. Kind of that's my main core identity. And then, so when I'm moving into those other areas, for me, it's a way to be playful and not an author in authority over the work. And my work is generally not good when I'm being an authority within it. I'm kind of stomping around as an author. So for me, every time I move out of my primary genre, which is again like kind of arbitrary anyway, but I feel like I can be playful and be a novice, and no one's watching, which no one's ever watching anyway. You know what I mean? But there's this idea of the critic, and when I'm in genres that I don't think of as my primary, I don't think of the critic as much. I really feel like I can be more playful. And so then, the lessons that I've learned in moving in other genres and writing in other genres, and then sometimes the same work moving through different genres, I think it's always made me better in my primary genre, or just maybe not better, but they're certainly transferable lessons, I would say.
But even within your primary genre of fiction, does it break down? Because I actually had to go to Wikipedia to look up what genre it was, because I wasn't totally sure. And they listed like 7 genres, but within, like, under the realm of fiction, I mean, there's a lot. Most of these seem to fall under the realm of fiction anyway. And you do, I know, magic realism type things, sci-fi, YA, and those would all be different genres within the umbrella, under the umbrella of fiction, right?
Yeah, the subgenres or whatever. And actually, we just say genres, different genres. And there's that feeling too of like, because I really don't think when I'm writing sci-fi, I don't feel like I belong there either. I feel like I'm kind of sneaking into somebody else's city, and taking all the good stuff.
But you've done that a lot, though. You've done it. I mean, you have the whole trilogy.
Yeah. And again, that's because my roots go magical realism back, to being in love with Marquez and that kind of thing, and then kind of spinning it more sci-fi.
But when you say fiction, does that mean that you're more into like this sort of realist fiction,
I think that when I first started out, first I wanted to be a playwright because my sister was in New York and she was on, she was on stage. She was a director, she's an actor, and I saw the chain smoker in the back and who was in charge of the words, and I was like really drawn to, for all the wrong reasons probably, but I was really drawn to that person. And then but then when I first started writing, it was really magical realism that I loved. And then the publishing industry kind of, at that point at least, was just, didn't want any of that kind of stuff very much. I mean, in general, I mean, they wanted Marquez, but, they didn't want my version of that. So I really had kind of realism beaten into me. And then when I was allowed to finally kind of do something else, all my love for all of that kind of came rushing back. And so, I mean, sci-fi again has such its own very clear, literary tradition, and I kind of fit and I kind of don't. But again, I like that not fitting. That again, I'd rather not fit. That's a much more, not fitting is more comfortable for me than fitting. And I'm wondering if that is, I don't know. Here's my question for you, I think, is that sometimes when I see a poet, and I think that of poetry and fiction, and that nonfiction is the bridge between. So when I see a poet and they're start to write nonfiction, I feel like they're on the bridge and prose there, and then they're going to start writing fiction. And then when you see a fiction writer starting to write essays and getting kind of closer to the bone of their own experience and nonfiction, I feel like eventually they're going to want to be more and more and more essential, and they might land in poetry. So I'm curious what you think of that theory, if you've ever wanted to land in fiction, and if that doesn't work for you at all.
I'm not sure if I'm going to drift completely or move over to fiction. I'm not sure. I might, but because I feel like I'm still sort of fascinated with what nonfiction does and what memoir does. That it has this lyric element, which is the poetry feeds the lyric element, and then there's something that's sort of actual, measurable in the world. Something that happens, something you can describe, something you can sort of try to understand, and sort of your perception bounces up against that. And if I was completely in a fictive world, I'm not sure if I have the muscles for that, like to create an entirely fictive world. I'm not sure if I have that impulse or understand it even. Like, I think I'm sort of barely in this world, and so to create like another world to me would be maybe terrifying. I mean, I think I'd be afraid I'd never come back from that experience. So,
do you have the inclination to lie though? Because as a fiction writer, I'm a liar. You know what I mean? Like, a novel by, or Big Fat Lies by. Well,
I do my best. Not being honest is like a daily practice. Something that I have to sort of like keep steering myself back toward. Because there have been periods of my life where I've drifted away from that, and so maybe to have a job where my job was to lie would be, maybe not the best job for me. So
it seems like a lot of people's jobs though are to lie. It seems like 90% of people I know.
When we get into like when we sort of broke down fiction into these other, you can get into magic realism, you get into, there's the Carver. I assume you were talking about sort of a Carver thing. I came up with Carver, which was not what I could do. I couldn't really do what Carver did, which I loved. I loved his work, this sort of distilled fiction. But I was more reading like things like, Borges and Calvino, and like things that were more like Stranger, that were, and so I was more, and then it just sort of, that led me to poetry. That was the fiction that led me to poetry. Where you could, because I do feel that poetry can do things that fiction does. It can move very quickly, but move in a way more that like Calvino or a Borges would do, and sort of anything can happen in that realm.
Actually, one of my first short stories, the editors accepted, and they said, I think it was my second story. They said, but we have to put inspired by Calvino, Italo Calvino, under it, because it's so clear. It's not his. It's not, you're not plagiarizing, but there's no way we can't acknowledge that in some way. And I was like, that works for me.
Calvino-esque, they could say.
Yeah.
I was thinking like with memoir, like, or would I, my nonfiction books have all been called memoir. And I'm okay with that, just because it's sort of the wild west of genres for me. It just feels like anyone can write a memoir in some way, or many people do. There's memoirs by rock stars, and there's memoirs by, there's a whole, it's a wide tent and sort of wild. But within that, there's like sort of journalism. There's new journalism. Like before that, like in the nonfiction realm, there's like journalism, new journalism. Then we get into like, sort of nonfiction, and then we get into memoir, then lyric essays, braided essays, creative nonfiction, sort of this sort of timeline of like how much lyric energy you can put into it, where the journalism is more or less. And then as you sort of go further, then it just on that other end, it gets into the poetry world. It sort of starts to become poetry, I think.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, as a screenwriter, I teach screenwriting. So I teach screenwriters, weirdly. And to me, the closest thing to the screenplay is the poem.
Yeah, you call it a plot poem. I saw it in an interview. You call it a plot poem.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, because what I think of is like both of them have to earn the white on the page. There's so much white on the page of a screenplay. There's so much white on the page of a poem. Yeah. And I think of it as like little houses with snow like piled up and around them, and they have to kind of hold this burden up. And how they do it is different a lot of times. Like the poem is doing it with language and with image, you know what I mean? And it has to, bear that weight. And then the screenplay has to do it with image, you know what I mean? Or dialogue or plot. Like it has to keep moving. It has to have the speed that moves through it. So,
yeah,
you know, if I think we were just like scanning pages, like those look a lot more alike than the dense prose of the memoir or the essay or the, you know, fiction.
I love that image that you have of the houses in the snow, these things. I was going to say that about my last memoir. Just I sort of thought about genre just before I went into it. The one, this is the house, this is the night will catch fire.
What are the 9 genres in it? That's what I want to know.
Sure. Well, there's actually, like you had said before, you've inserted a poem directly from a thing. I have a poem that's in my last book of poetry that is basically just put into this thing, and then there's a few chapters that are. You have to look closely. They're long lines, but there's line breaks in them. They're not like actually. And I just needed to have sort of that sort of energy in those things. Like you have to look, you have to see it, but they're clearly poems. If you sort of look at them, they don't go to the end of the line. So they're lineated. So there's poems within it that are sort of, hidden, smuggled into it. Didn't want to scare anyone with them. There's actually plays in it too. There's actually just sections of pure dialogue with like characters saying the things, like, characters with their names on it, like in a play. There is, I know you work with fairy tale also. So there's the whole thing began, it's sort of drifting. It's a memoir. Like my earlier memoirs were more in the realism realm. And this one was really drifting toward fairy tale, like taking elements of fairy tale within it. It's based on a story I'd tell my daughter when she was 7. And it sort of we were reading a lot of fairy tales, and it sort of took on the air of a fairy tale in the telling of it. And that's how the book began. There's a little, either magic realism or like Ovid, like there's a person turning into a beast in it, becoming a beast within it. So that's something. There's a bit of confession in it. The idea of confession, if that's a genre, probably some kind of a genre. I'd like to, I wouldn't use it as a self-help book or a how-to book, but someone might do that.
Dangerously.
Yeah, I can't stand behind it. But basically it falls under, there's a French term in France. I don't know what your books get published in, but in France they don't have a word for memoir. They don't really know what that means or something, or it's not their. They call my books recite, RECIT, which is there's a really beautiful definition of it, which I pulled up and will read for you, because that's sort of what I want to do, is to just write receipts. I would like to put that on my American books too, but
come from received, recette.
Well, it's a French term. Recite is a French term for a type of writing that is not the narration of an event, but that event itself. The approach to that event, the place where that event is made to happen. So it's the idea that it's like when you talk about poetry and you say that a poem isn't about anything, but it's an experience. It's the experience of reading the poem. And that is, so it's the event itself. The reading of it.
The recitation. They're talking about kind of like the recitation, the experience of it. Yeah.
It must come from that in some way. Yeah, I should look up the etymology of it. Yeah, and see where it comes from. Yeah. Oh, look, somebody looked it up for us. Somebody down below.
That's so good.
Oh, I like that. Good. Yeah.
Yeah. I love when that protest in French is manifestation. Like it's manifestation of, what can't be seen. You know what I mean? Like this wouldn't exist if that other shit weren't going on, as opposed to. Yeah,
the manifestation. Yeah, and a store is a magazine. I like that too. We could talk more about the screenplay stuff, like how that's different. I'm interested in that because you're doing a screenplay now. You're working on one now.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I am, but it's based on a short story of mine, not anything that's optioned or in development. I think honestly, I taught the novel seminar for a couple times in my life, and I've taught groups of people writing novels, and I always feel like I'd much rather than take a screenwriting class and then do the novel. It's kind of like if you know how to write a screenplay, you know how to do the pencil marks on the canvas before you add the watercolor. I love it when you always see like the original in a painting behind. You still see those marks to see it. Is this to scale? You know, whereas not at least when I first started writing novels, I would just start oil painting layers in one corner of the canvas and be like, God damn, I hope this is to scale. You know, and so screenwriting helps.
So you can see the screenplay like a screenplay as like that's so interesting. It's like the ghost of the whole book, and then the book could be filled in from that. That's so interesting.
And it's very agile. Like you can make a change and change, you know, it all the way through, and its ramifications aren't embedded in every line, you know, in this really gritty way as in a novel.
I have my students do an exercise where, and I often use Carol Churchill's play "Love and Information." It's just a play where it's just like, you know, there's little short sections of people talking about a subject. It'll say like, you know, shame or something. And then it'll just be, they won't even have characters' names. It's just each line is a different person talking. And we just sort of we perform those. And then, you know, they have to sort of do a performance in like 5 minutes. They have to sort of get it and decide the characters and then sort of do them. And then we write from that. Like we sort of take one of their things and write, and just a pure dialogue, like two people talking about something. And it really is like this, such another way of like entering into the work where you don't have all the props. You know, they're not, you know, they could pick something up and talk about it, but it would be kind of weird. Like, here's my cup. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to describe my cup now. And usually it doesn't do that. It's really just people having a, you know, conversation between each other. You know,
well, that's why I love theater and improv, because it's the truth of writing. You know what I mean? Like I always have this idea that I'm writing, but I'm really just improvising, you know? I really don't know what I'm doing in a moment-to-moment way.
Well, yeah, we hope not. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. We want to sort of have that sort of that energy, that wild energy of each moment is sort of like a high wire act where you're not really sure if this is going to work at all. And the good thing about writing is that 90% of it doesn't work. I mean, most of it doesn't work. And then
also in memoir, I'd be curious about that, because you do have at least the illusion if you know how it worked out. You have that illusion, right?
But what if it didn't work out?
Yeah, or it didn't work out, but you have but you're still processing on the page. So, you know, it's still improvisational.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's totally. And I like the story itself, like that. The sort of short story you can tell about like what your memoir is about is, for me, is it's not really the memoir. That's not the work at all. That's like another thing. It's not even the bones of it. It's not even like the ghost of it, like with the dialogue. Like that's even much more complex. This is sort of like, you know, if you say like I'm writing about my, you know, my father who was homeless and, you know, me encountering him, like that's like, that doesn't even get close to what the work is to write that book. You know, even if I know those, you know, I know those things. And then the actual act of like going in and describing the place he was in, it took years. I mean, it took years to even though I'd been there, like, so, but you know, it's like with anything, I think it's probably with fiction too. It's choosing what you're going to describe. Like why is that door there? Why are you talking about that door and not, you know, the 5 other doors in the room? Like what's important about that door? So,
right.
Yeah. So it has that same energy, I think there's a lot about fiction too. Like in this, there's also fiction stuff in this book, because I enter into my, you know, my mother's mind. I have her talking. There's a whole section of it where it's just my mother, you know, her internal dialogue, for many pages, you know, which is clearly not real. That's a fiction, right? Like, are you allowed to do that in memoir, or, you know,
or are you almost beholden to in some way at a certain point? You know what I mean? You know, if that's what we need in order to see you process, then we need that.
And you know, but I do have that sense of like, I do have a code, you know, I have a code going into like nonfiction that I'm not going to like sort of just create something out of cloth. Like what she says is, I base her in this section in one scene. It's her, like, she would make donuts. The book is about sort of me when I was 7, talking to my daughter when she was 7. So it's sort of our lives. I become like a 7-year-old. And when I was that age, my mother would make donuts at like 5 a.m. at a supermarket. And we'd go there, like often she'd have to take us. She was a single mother, so she'd take me and my brother, or just me. I don't know. But I remember being magical, being in the supermarket at 5 a.m. my mother making donuts. We get to eat the donuts, but we'd also just wander the whole supermarket. I would wander alone in this dark supermarket and just eat food and just, do whatever I wanted. And so I located her in that space, which is an actual space. It still exists. The supermarket still exists, and so, and it's all like a series of men who are sort of coming to see her there. Or, my mother had several boyfriends when I was growing up, and so these are like the guys that would sort of have them coming out looking for a donut in the morning. So it's all within the realm of like what happened, and it's located in a recognizable time and place. It's like you could still go there, and I've gone there with my daughter and actually bought a donut there still, that someone else's mother made, at 5 a.m. I guess.
That's great.
Yeah, but
great.
It did feel like it needed, and I'm not sure for a memoir if I'd feel okay with entering into the mind of someone who wasn't a blood relative in some way. I somehow think there's some mystical.
Well, also too, in this case, you're her monster, so you know what I mean. She created you, so.
I've never heard that before. I've never thought of myself as my mother's monster. Wow.
Sorry.
No. I'm gonna sleep on that and go to therapy tomorrow and talk about it.
Are we supposed to do questions? Is there supposed to be a time for questions? I think we still have time, right? Yeah. I mean, my mom has given me permission. She just said you can write anything you want about me, anything at all. You can write anything you want, and I think it was part of that is like, she just. Well, also I've been pretty, good to her, but she did recently.
Good to her in the writing? Good to her in the writing, you mean? Or
good to her in the writing, because she was obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was hard for her to raise 4 kids. But so I have a very sweet take on that. I think I think she'd say generous take too. But yeah, I think it is different in that I'm very careful. Like I had siblings, and none of my novels had siblings until, recently, because I was very cautious about not wanting to write about my siblings. And I felt more protective of them or something. But now I do, sisters.
Yeah, I even in a novel, I would think it would be hard not to have like, a mom in it or a dad or something.
Yeah. And they're always my mom. That's the thing about that. We talked about this a little bit in coming to it. Like I get to my obsessions. Like if you're writing, your mom is always your mom. My mom, I can pretend that she's not my mom in this novel or that novel or another novel, you know what I mean? But it is always my mother. You know what I mean? I get to, when I move to a different genre, and in a different world or fantasy or whatever, or moving, I can really hide from myself the truth. And that's the thing that I really like about fiction, that it would be very hard for me to give up. I mean, I write essays, but it'd be very hard for me to give up, because I really do like the idea of the veil for myself, the veil of fiction that I'm hiding. I can go for the jugular. And then when I'm on tour, somebody asks me a question and I realize in the interview, like, oh shit, that is my mother. Yeah.
Take
a minute. I'm going to have to take a minute,
What I've done with that is, like in poems, like I realize that with poems, I mean, the fiction element of poetry is the persona poem, where you get to take on a persona. And, I found it thrilling too. The times I've done it is like, I have a whole book of in persona. And there was something about it that was, like you're saying, was so liberating, because I was able to, my first book of poems, the first book that came out was poems, and it was very lyric.
Oh, is this Huber, Blind Huber? Is this?
Yeah.
I have a poem about his wife, but in any case, and then I found your book and I was like, oh, well, there you go.
Was she real? His wife? Does he have a wife?
I don't know. I think, or maybe I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I'll find it. I don't know that it ever went in any of my books, but I remember seeing him. You know what? Maybe it came from. Is it in Various Antidotes? Does Joanna Scott write about Huber?
Yeah, she wrote about Huber. Yeah.
So that's so maybe it's not. But
just so you all know, all you out in Sanibel Island land, Huber is a blind French Swiss beekeeper from the 17th century that studied bees, and we have both now written about something around him. So,
me vaguely, you a whole book.
I had a 6-year affair with Huber. And yeah, there's something about persona that allowed me to, like the first book was lyric memoir, lyric confessional or neo-confessional poetry. And there is something constraining about that, because you don't want to, you can show yourself in a bad light, but like there's certain realms of like emotional experience that seem sort of off. Like it was hard to be sort of like gleeful when you're writing about like your mother's suicide or something, to have like sort of like, to have these complicated emotions that are not like sort of what is sort of within the realm of recognizable human experience. But if you're writing from the point of view of a bee, then you're able to be like strangely small-hearted when the queen gets killed, and have certain amount of pleasure in destruction, and there's all sorts of things that could get released, and it was really liberating to do persona, which I think is probably what fiction writers probably feel.
Well, I did a book called Lizzie Borden in Love, of poems all in different voices and women. And in looking back, in some ways, that's, I feel like, my most intimate, because I was allowed to be my most vulnerable self in those poems, and that offloaded all of the, perceived shame, perceptible shame or fear or whatever.
There's that sort of presentation of self that we have, like we're sort of this performance that we do of who we are and how we want to be in the world. Even though, I push against it. I mean, in my books, like, you might not like me if you read my books. It's not like I'm trying to present like some idealized version of myself, but persona does allow you, or fiction does allow you to go even further into a whole nother, that empathy. You talk about empathy a lot in your interviews, and, like why we read and why we write is sort of to understand the other, have that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's that act of empathy for your mother, you know what I mean, in that moment. I mean, I don't know how that section in the book reads, but at least it's that you're trying to get within, And
it really was. I was trying to understand her at that moment, or, which is, was impossible at the time since I was 6 years old. It was impossible to understand, there's just, parents are what they are at 6, which is, hard. My daughter seems so perceptive, but maybe I might have seemed utterly, incomprehensible, inscrutable to her, although she seems to know me completely, but it's strange.
Yeah. It's great to be, I've loved being a writer with, having raised kids. It's definitely being seen by them,
You also write books for them too, that they can read, which is.
Yeah, but my kids don't read my books necessarily. My oldest daughter just started reading some of my books, and she read Pure. I wrote Pure for her in a way, but I don't really talk about being a writer much. I talk about, like, they hear me bitching, like we are a family of fishmongers who sell fish. Like, you're going to hear us talk about books in that way. But in terms of, reading my work, I really kind of keep it separate. Even like the Anybody's or Prince of Fenwick Park. I remember one of my kids came home from school, and it was a read aloud because it was on the Florida Book Awards. The Anybody's was, and he just stared at me. He just like watched me. He just hawked me like, "Are you having a double life? Who are you?" That's
magical experience to suddenly have his mom's voice like in the room with everyone like reading it out loud in the room. It's amazing.
Yeah.
The question, we just lost it. Like, I think about is there a specific genre that you find more challenging to write about? And if so, why? You want to take that one?
Well, my answer to that is that's the reason why I'm cross-genre. I write across genres because when I get really frustrated and limited in one genre, I move to another genre. So I was not a poet. I felt very uncomfortable writing poems, when they were, suggested for class assignments or in a poetry workshop or something in undergrad. But I married a poet, and so when I had my second child, I had very little time. My time just shrunk considerably, and I suddenly had like a lot to say. I was really kind of like, wow, I'm very betrayed by motherhood. No one has explained this is going to do. And so I keep telling Dave, you should write a poem about blah, 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 and the betrayal of motherhood. And you should write it this way. And he's like, it's not my territory, And so, because my time shrunk and my kind of like need to express, especially like thought, like epiphany, like feeling and image and what I've been fed and processing it in a different way. And poetry really worked because I could do a smaller space and a bit more like electrified and then just walk away. You know what I mean? I didn't have to do rising action, opening and closing doors. They're eating now and they're fighting and now we denouement. Like I didn't have time for that. And I also didn't have patience. I wasn't interested in that. That wasn't going to help me get through what I needed to get through. So that's, it's not that one, it's not that I like one or one's easier than the other. It's that at different times in my life, I need one more than the other. And so that's why moving through them has been so helpful to me, just as a human being.
That's really nice. Yeah, that you need them at different times. I sort of, I started out as a poet, after I tried fiction when I was younger, and then I moved into poetry, and that sort of seemed to match more the way I thought, the way the world seemed to me, sort of lined up more with it. The memoir sort of came, I wasn't sure what it was going to be. Like, I don't know what the books are going to be before I write them. Usually I don't have a sense, like, at least that was true in the beginning. Like, I didn't know what it would turn into. It would turn into a poem or turn into a book. I hadn't written a prose. But now that I've done it, I've done a play also. And I mean, I would say like challenging, like the play was challenging in a way, but in a thrilling way, just because, I got to work with like actors and actually have actors like moving them, and to see actors moving things. I wrote about some of the same things that I've written about in my poems. Like there's a image of my father pulling a trash bag up on his body. And I have it in a poem, I have it in my memoir, and I have it in the play. And it's just to see it in these different forms appear, and to actually then in the play, not to have to say anything about it, just to have someone do it. And like, have no comment on it. And while he's saying something, he's just sort of like, talking about something else, actually not drawing any attention to the fact that he's putting himself in a trash bag. And just to have it exist on those different levels is really thrilling, which is a thrilling thing about genre too, like, or just writing in different, these different registers, because each one has their own requirements. Each one has their own requirements. And so in a play, you don't have to talk about what the people are doing, because they can see, the audience can see what they're doing, which is really when I realized that, when I'm like, oh, they'll just do it. Like you don't have to have them, like the people are actually doing it in front of you. You can see it. I don't have to describe it. I don't have to say like, hey, why are you putting yourself in a trash bag? Like that would be dumb in a play. Whereas in prose, you need to say that. You need to actually have that described. So, yeah. Yeah,
I actually would like to write a play. That's the one thing, because that's where I started out. So I'm jealous there. Sorry. Do you begin with a story and then find the genre to best share it, or do you start with the genre and then write the story? Some are so part and parcel, you know what I mean, that they come together, can kind of conjoined. But there are definitely times when, like Pure, for example, was me just in a short story trying to do my best George Saunders inspired piece, you know what I mean? And it was about a 23-year-old who has a doll for a head instead of a fist. She has a doll head instead of a fist, and she wears a gold toe sock over it. And it's about the guy who's coming to break up with her, but he can't because her mother's coming to town, and her mother's really hard on her about having the doll head. The story, no one wanted to publish this story. No one. Everybody was like, what are you doing? What is this? And then I thought, yeah, there actually is something here, but it's so much more interesting if it's somebody who's just moved out of childhood and they want to get rid of their childhood and they're kind of ashamed of it. And yet here this doll is with them. And so, somebody who's like 15, 16, that's much more interesting than how did it get fused? And now I'm in sci-fi, and you know what I mean? So there are times when you try it one way and it doesn't work, and then you try it a different way.
Yeah, that's great. Just metaphorically, it's an amazing thing with that image of the girl with the doll head for a hand. It's just like, like trying to move from childhood, but you're stuck with it, since mine are like, Julianna and I had talked earlier, I think it was earlier, or maybe it was during live, I forget now, I can't keep track of time, but about how, we talked about it live, like how a memoir, the story's already there. But for me, that's not really true. It's usually just a glimmer of something. I'll just sort of be writing, I do like daily writing anyway of some sort. I engage with writing in some way pretty much every day. And then after a while, I mean, the books take like, 5 years or something to do. And after a while, just sort of energy will start to sort of gather around certain images that I've been writing, that they'll sort of keep returning, and I'll sort of deepen them, and I'll be surprised by it. I'll be like, oh, this is, and the last book, This is the Night Our House Will Catch Fire, really just began as stories I would tell my daughter when she was really interested to know what my life was like when I was 7. When she was 7, she wanted to know what I did when I was 7. And I was like, oh, I don't really remember. So, but I remembered one thing. I remember like one really vivid image, and I would tell her that, and it sort of grew from that. I sort of tried to, and we did it in different genres, I guess. It's like, I had her make a picture book of the story I told her. We made like a song of the story I told her. We, told the story again. We went to visit the place. We did all these sort of things, which would count as like research, or, trying a different way. We storyboarded it out. And there's basically just a sort of like, I would sort of like, tell the story, and then she would draw a picture of it. And then, but it just grew from that. And then I realized that there was other stuff around, like, why was I telling a story, which is also the thing for memoir. I think you always sort of, I don't know what you need to do, but I always encourage my students also to ask themselves why they're telling that story, like what it is about that story and not the other stories you could tell around that time. It might be that you only remember that story, but there are other things I remembered around it, but they just didn't have the same energy. They didn't have the same sort of like, energy enough to sort of sustain one through a book. So yeah. Time for one more question. Good Lord. Oh my Lord. It published mixed genres.
I think it is. I think it is, but I think it's changing. So is it harder to get published if you mix genres? I mean, we've had such interesting books come out, some really critically acclaimed books that are doing things with text and image and parts, you know what I mean? I was just looking at Dorothy, the publisher Dorothy, that does a lot with, kind of sometimes smaller books that are, mixing things. So, but again, like if you're going, the more you're pushing toward mixing the genres and doing something, we were talking about where the borders meet, the really interesting work happens when people are transferring themselves and moving between borders. So the more you're doing that, if you're doing that for an audience, for, publishers who are really hungry for that and want more of that, I think that then you're in a good spot. If you want to go to a traditional publishing house, I think it's going to be harder to convince them that I'll get all the audiences, you know what I mean? Not just one, So, and I think part of it too, for me, a book, it kind of goes to why in a way, but for me, a lot of times a book really becomes very clear when I know who I'm writing it and who I'm talking to, who's the one person. If I can kind of get it down to one person and what that person wants and needs, then that's really helpful to me in terms of, just the whole thing coming together and making sense. I can't think about audience and like all the editors who might read it and all the readers who might, read it. But if I can think about one person, that helps me clarify.
Nice. I was looking at the question from a different point of view. I'm not sure. The question was a little, you could read it two ways, like an Escher drawing or something. Like, I didn't know if it was, you were taking it as if the different, mixing the genres within one book, within one project, I think. And I thought maybe it was like, if you write in different genres, if you have if each book is a different genre. I think if it is within one book, I think it really depends. I think people are getting much more open to having hybrid work out there that crosses those lines, like you're saying. I mean, I think there's really an opening to speculative fiction, to having, just to having more lyric essays, to having things that are sort of like banging up against each other. I think that there's things, and doing it in different genres. I mean, if you do different books, your solution is to have different authors' names. You could do it with different names. You could do it like that. I do it the same. I don't notice. I have a different publisher for my poetry, a different publisher for my my prose right now, and I don't know if it's. I'm not sure. Like, it just seemed like, that just works for me. Like, I don't know. And I think they're both open to it. It's not like you don't usually have even the same readers. You often do not have the same readers. Like, one person read your, knew that your poem, you'd stuck a poem into, from a book of poetry into your prose. And I think it'd be about the same for me too. That's an excellent reader that can notice that.
They were so mad at me. So mad. I lost them.
No, they were mad?
They were so mad.
You paid him back. You'd have paid him back the whatever that would be worth.
I think that I am jealous sometimes of writers who, when I pick up a book, I know exactly what I'm going to get. You know what I mean? And I think sometimes with writers like me, it's like, you pick up one of my books, you don't know what you're going to get. It's kind of all over the place. So I think there is something to be said for giving people having a voice that's very clear and distinctive. And sometimes I wish I could do that, but I can't, because I get bored of myself and I can't stand being myself. And so I try to at least do something different, in order. And so there's also something to be said for, agility and moving between genres to kind of also keep publishing across the board. I don't know.
I think we've come to the end. I think Tom and Jason are going to come back in and say hi now. I think. Hey, Tom.
Hey, guys. Great job. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Nick.
No.
Fantastic.
Hey, Jason.
Hey, well, we made it to the end.
We made it. How you feeling anyway?
I'm good. I put the heating pad on my back like you suggested. Very helpful. Very helpful.
It's a lifesaver. It's a backsaver.
It helped me focus because there was a lot to take in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty great about this little experiment that we did this year.
Yeah, I loved it. Every minute of it was great.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are still watching us, thank you so much for hanging out. I hope you had your own heating pads for sitting around for so long each day. And we're just thrilled that you were able to tune in and that we were able to bring you this programming. And we can't wait to see you next year in person at Big Arts on Sanibel Island for the 2021 Sanibel Island Writers Conference. Jason, you want to say anything else about the server?
The 2021 conference, you say? Was that my cue? Yeah, we're going to be back on the island. That's the plan. We do have registration discount right now. If you sign up between now and Halloween, you can save $100 on your registration fee for the conference. So it's only $450 instead of $550, which is regular price, which is what you'll pay if you don't grab it this week. We also have 4 Sanibel Island hotels: the Sanibel Inn, the Sunshine Island Inn, Kona Kai, and the Sundial, that are also offering discounts for Sanibel members. So if you attendees, so if you can go to our website, you've seen all the links. If you go to the Facebook page for A Mighty Blaze or for the Sanibel Island Writers Conference, you can find those links there, or to our webpage, ftcu.edu/SIWC. You will see that all roads point you to that registration page, and all the discount information is on there, and you can take advantage of it. We're hoping to see you guys on the island next year, and really looking forward to it. As much fun as this has been, and a different little change of pace, I'm ready to sit by that pool behind the hotel and swat at no-see-ums. And yeah, I'm ready for that.
I am so ready for that, especially now as I look out my window here and see the snow piling up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I bet.
Well, listen, before we say goodbye, we want to say thank you, because putting together a program like this requires a lot of hands to do the lifting. And first, I want to thank, again, all of you who tuned in and who sent comments and questions during all of the sessions. Those were really great. We love the feedback, we love the questions, and we think that we made it a much more dynamic conversation between all of the presenters, because they were responding to your immediate needs. So thanks for that. We really appreciate you collaborating with us on this. Especially, I want to give a special shout out to my class, the Writing Theory and Practice students. I know you guys were all here because I saw all your comments and your questions. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and I hope I didn't oversell it. I hope I undersold it, and that you really felt like it was worthwhile and a lot of fun. I want to thank all these people at Florida Gulf Coast University who helped make this happen and make it possible. Dr. Fiona Tolhurst, Dr. Chuck Lindsay, President Martin, Norm Walker, Lori Cornelius, Kyle McCurry. I want to thank Nancy Stetson and Jeff Cull at Florida Weekly. I want to thank Nancy McPhee and her entire staff at the Lee County Visitors Bureau. I want to thank my good buddy Kevin Toller, who helped design all of the ads. I want to thank everybody at A Mighty Blaze who helped produce this and make it possible for us to be online this year. That includes founders and CEOs Jenna Blum and Carolyn Levitt, and the entire team of Tom Shampoo, Margaret Pinard, Amanda Smiley, Sarah Christensen Few, Laura Rossi, and Whitney Scherer. I want to thank Blue Flower Arts. They represent a bunch of the presenters who came this year, especially Anya Backlund and Anna Samos. And of course, I want to thank all of the great presenters who presented this year, many of whom are going to be there next year. So if you enjoyed them this year, you're going to see a bunch of them next year, including we got Aaron and Steve Almond, Andrea Askowitz, Julianna Baggott, Lynn Barrett, Jenna Blum again, who not only was behind A Mighty Blaze, but also a presenter and a moderator a bunch of times. Mahogany L. Brown, Augustine Burroughs, Joe Clifford, John Dufresne, Camille Dungy, Beth Ann Fennelly, Nick Flynn, Lisa Gallagher, Todd Goldberg, Christina Baker Klein, Allison Langer, Ron McLean, Joyce Maynard, Christopher Schelling, John Schimmel, Jeffrey Thompson, Brian Turner, and Stephen Womack. On behalf of myself and Jason Ellick, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next year on the island.